Okay. Okay, welcome everyone that's just entering the Zoom room. What would start as close to 7 as possible, and I appreciate it's in the evening and people will have other things going on. So really appreciate your time this evening coming to this event. We've got a great event lined up on behalf of the ACPRC. This is the Bursary feedback event. And my name's Adam Lewis. I teach at University of Southampton and I do research at Southampton, at Brunel University, Royal Brompton and Harefield Hospitals, and quite a bit from my bedroom. um, so some housekeeping for today's meeting. First is if you're not presenting or you're part of the audience, to keep your cameras off. The fire exits are there and there. There won't be a fire drill. And what we're going to do is we're going to hear the presentations from people who have received ACPRC bursaries first. There'll be 7 presentations, which will take us just after 8 probably. And then we'll have a question and answer discussion section. So all questions will be fielded afterwards. And then I'll summarize the event and close and re-highlighting the bursary. So before we get to the speakers themselves, I'm just going to share my screen to show where you can find further information out about the bursaries, because I appreciate some people will have to leave later on of this session. So let me just share this screen. Okay, so on the ACPRC website, there's the resources section once you go to member login. And if you're not a member, then it's brilliant value, £50 per year for a load of events like this, the conference, a very supportive committee, and really informative newsletter. Anyway, the resources section, there's a page called Education Support, and it goes in a lot of detail about what the support is for and how you go about applying for it. But in summary, the ACPRC have £10,000 made available each year to support CPD for members, 500 for the award, and now we're able to offer also travel and accommodation support for up to £200. So let's say you're thinking about submitting something for ACPRC conference in April next year, and the submission opens in September. You write your abstract, it's reviewed, and you're successful, and you're able to present. But maybe you have to travel from a different region of the UK, far from Edinburgh, maybe, and you think, okay, I may need some support for the travel and accommodation to support the abstract presentation. That could be considered by the committee. There's further information there, and I can just summarize that at the end. And any queries, please don't hesitate to contact me or secretary at acprc.org.uk. So we've got a great lineup of presenters today with a really good variety of work on show. So I will let the presenters introduce themselves whilst I share my screen. The first presenter will be Fiona. So I'll get Fiona's presentation up and we will go from there. Let me know if and when you can see that.
Yeah,
Fiona.
that's great. Thanks, Adam.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much. My name's Fiona Schroeder. I'm a physiotherapist working with Swansea, the Swansea team and Swansea University Health Board in South Wales by the beach, which is lovely. I was chatting with Charlotte Pereira, who was on the ACPRC committee at the conference last year, and said that I was really keen to do Rosalba Courtney's course on integrative breathing therapy practitioner training. But the full price of the course is around about £4,500. But Rosalba Courtney, who runs it, was offering a scholarship for half price to ACPRC members, but still just over £2,000 was quite hefty. And she encouraged me to apply for a bursary, which I was successful at receiving £500, which is a big help towards the fees. The application was very easy online, and the decision was made quite quickly, which was extremely helpful. So I'm going to just talk about the course and let you know what it consisted of. And I know Elizabeth is talking later, and she's done the course with me as well. So this is a course for all professions, really, all healthcare professions. There've been speech and language therapists, osteopaths, psychologists, myofascial therapists, GPs, psychologists, from all around the world, and it's held online. It has been 24 weeks teaching starting in June last year, so once a week. They offer, I think they initially offered 3 different times because of the different time zones across the world, which they slimlined to 2 times because there weren't many people on the 3rd time. We were preloaded with pre-recorded lectures and reading to do before each tutorial. And then each tutorial was approximately an hour and a half where we discussed what we'd learned. And sometimes we were asked to do exercises. So maybe asked to do some of the exercises with family members or patients. It is very, very evidence-based. Rosalba Courtney's done a PhD in dysfunctional breathing, and the initial few weeks were a deep dive revision of neurophysiology of breathing, as well as physiology of the lungs and gas exchange and all the laws of gas exchange, which was lovely to revisit before she moved on to all the practical sessions. They use a platform where they have an online discussion forum, so we can chat with each other and share resources. So the tutorials finished in December, mid-December, and now we've moved on to fortnightly mentoring sessions. So the idea is that we write up 5 case studies using the techniques that we've learned to become recognized practitioners. The other thing that we had to do as part of this course is submit a 2,500 word literature review on a subject of our choice. And I investigated dysfunctional breathing in Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility syndrome, as I see a lot of patients with hypermobility, and we presented that to each other. So at the moment, I'm still seeing the patients and collecting, working with the techniques I've learned and writing those up for submission. I'm currently involved with some research separately through the ACPRC with dysfunctional breathing, but I would like to do further research and audit. I'm obviously teaching locally to doctors, the asthma nurses, my peers, and Rosalba is coming over for the ERS Congress in September and has offered to come to Swansea to do 2 study days, one on nasal rehabilitation and one on breathing. But it's gone completely from my mind. Breathing muscle reset, a practical course. So that will be the last week in September. Hopefully we'll be getting advertising out soon for those courses, so look out for them if you're interested. On reflection, I've found it fantastic. I really have enjoyed the course. I've done Bradcliffe's levels 1 and 2, and years ago did the Anne Pittman course at the Wellington 100 years ago. And I've done the physiotherapy for BPD courses, but this takes a much deeper dive. It was fantastic being able to learn from other professions, and particularly osteopaths who take a really holistic approach, and it's thinking a bit more about lymphatic drainage and so on. I have found in particular the nasal rehabilitation really helpful with patients, really effective. And I think they will probably think I'm a bit mad because we do all sorts of things like humming and sniffing essential oils and things like that. But it's very effective with patients who aren't nose breathing. This is such a complex group. It's just given me more tools in my toolbox alongside everything else that I use. So I do pick and choose depending on the patient and their presentation, what they're going to be able to manage and so on. So it has been a really, really useful course, and I really would recommend that for anyone who can afford it and is thinking of it, who would like a much more intense, in-depth examination. It has been a really good support network, and we've been able to share ideas and learn from each other, and that's been really invaluable. So all I can say is thank you to the ACPRC for the support, which really made a big difference in helping out, especially on top of all the house renovations that we're currently undertaking. So thank you very much. And I think we're going to take questions after all the speakers have finished. So if anyone's got any burning questions, hold on to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. I think any burning questions, you're probably in the wrong forum. But I take your point. Thank you, Fiona. That's great. Okay, so the next presenter will be Lindsay. So I will stop sharing and let Lindsay introduce herself and start sharing my screen again with Lindsay's presentation. Bear with. Here we go.
Would you like me to share them, Adam, or are you doing it?
They should be coming up now.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, I'm Lindsay Houchin-Willoff. I'm a research physiotherapist at the University Hospitals of Leicester. So I work clinically in pulmonary rehabilitation, and my research is in the Biomedical Research Centre, and I've got an honorary lectureship with the University of Leicester. So I applied for the bursary to support my American Thoracic Society conference place last year, which was held in Washington. And obviously traveling to Washington is quite expensive, as well as the conference fees. So when I saw the bursary application come out in the ACPRC newsletter, I thought I'd take a punt, not really thinking I'd necessarily get it, but I did, and I was delighted. It's a very straightforward 2-page application form, which is submitted by email to the Secretary of the ACPRC. And I also attached the abstracts as sort of evidence of what I was asking for. And down the right-hand side is just the questions that, if anyone's interested in applying, these are the types of questions you'll be asked on the application form. So the funding covered my registration fee, and it really helped my employer, I guess, consider the other aspects, and like the travel and the accommodation. I think if you can go and say I've sourced some of my own funding, then that looks good on paper to them. The ACPRC were really quick to communicate the decision, so I heard within a month that I had been successful with the funding, so that was great. So I had an oral presentation, which I'm going to tell you about in a moment. So that was on the minimum important difference for the incremental and endurance shuttle walk test in patients with interstitial lung disease. I also had a thematic poster which looked at maintenance preferences for people following post-COVID rehabilitation. I, at the time, was on the web committee of the American Thoracic Society, and attending this meeting in Washington, I actually came home with the directorship. So I don't know if that's a good outcome or not. It's a lot of work, but it is good for profile raising. And lots of networking and sightseeing. As you can see here, quite a few beers consumed. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to tell you now about the abstract that I presented. So next slide, please. So as many as you'll know, shuttle walk tests are commonly used as an outcome measure in pulmonary rehab to prescribe exercise and also evaluate the outcome of the programme. And the MID for the shuttle walk tests are well established for the COPD population, but we don't really know very much about the MID of this test for people with interstitial lung disease. There's just been one study that looked at this in IPF. So the aim of this work was to establish the minimum important difference. So that's the minimum change really that somebody needs to improve by to notice a difference in their performance. We wanted to look at that for the incremental and the endurance shuttle walk tests in patients with all interstitial lung diseases. Next slide, please. So it was a service evaluation, and we prospectively evaluated patients with ILD who'd completed face-to-face rehab over a 10-year period. It was twice weekly supervised sessions for 6 weeks that included aerobic and resistance exercise, as well as self-management education. And we classed people as a completer if they had a minimum attendance, 75% of sessions. And we calculated the MID using 2 methods. So we used a global rating of change scale, which you can see is on this 7-point Likert scale on the left-hand side. And we also used a distribution-based method, which it looks at 0.5 times the standard deviation. Next slide. So this is the baseline characteristics of the group, and you can see that although it was still predominantly IPF, we were able to include a number of other conditions, and we had 213 patients included in the analysis. Next slide, please. So this was the MID for the incremental shuttle walk test for the ILD population. So it ranged between 38.4 meters using the distribution-based method and 58.8 meters using sort of the higher end of the global rate of change, which was the improved category. And for the endurance shuttle, this ranged between 169.8 seconds and 209 seconds based on those 2 different methods. Next slide. So we were able to suggest an MID for the incremental and the endurance walk tests, and this seemed to be broadly consistent with what we see for the COPD population. Obviously the novelty of this is that it's a large sample. We'd included all interstitial lung diseases, not just IPF, and for the first time we'd estimated the MID for the endurance as well as the incremental shuttle walk test. Next slide. So we can use this to benchmark services and improvements following rehab, and also to inform sample size calculations. Obviously there are limitations with MID. Sorry, Adam, something's popped up on the screen. There we go. It will vary depending on what method you use. So there is a bit of a range between whether you use the global rate of change, which always tends to be higher than the statistical methods. And our next steps were to define the patient population further, anchor to known MIDs for questionnaires, and also looking at survival. And this is what we've included in our paper, which is in draft at the moment. Next slide, please. This was the thematic poster. I'm not going to go into great detail because that wasn't the title of my talk, but this was from a PhD student who looked at maintenance options following COVID rehab for patients who'd followed a rehabilitation programme. And generally, there was an appetite for patients to have some sort of maintenance programme. Next slide. Thank you. So sort of the impact of the bursary for me, and I guess the service, is that from the MID presentation, we're now using these locally within our clinical practice, and the paper's ready for submission. So that should hopefully be visible soon. And from the thematic poster, we now refer patients post-COVID to our active lifestyle schemes previously they'd only taken people from COPD or cardiac rehabilitation, and now see patients with COVID as well. So that's been a good outcome. And as I said, for me personally, I picked up the web committee directorship in Washington, and I've just put some screenshots of our pulmonary rehab website for the ATS. And just to highlight, we have journal clubs once a month that are online, and they're free for people to join. You don't need to be an ATS member. There's actually one at 9 o'clock tonight that I'm chairing. Not that I'm expecting you might join that, but in future, have a look for our journal clubs. It's well worth attending. Next slide, please. That's it. Thank you. They're my contact details. I will be around later, but if there's any questions, happy to answer them, or maybe they could be popped in the chat. Thank you.
Another great presentation. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And if there are any questions, this session will be recorded, and we can get those to you, or the contact details there, Lindsay. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Again, I'll stop sharing and get the next presentation up. Okay, so next to present is Joe Hardy. So I will share my screen for Joe's presentation. Got it. Got it. Okay. I'll try and maximize this 1 second whilst the Zoom controls are doing their thing, Joe. The bar at the top has to go. So we'll give it a second, because otherwise you can't really see the details there. That's fine. Come on. Okay, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Jo Hardy. I'm clinical specialist physiotherapist in critical care at Leeds Teaching Hospitals. And I'm also the adult therapies lead for advancing practice within our organisation. And my interest is in developing an AHP model for advancing practice. So over the past decade, we've seen the introduction and exponential growth of the generalist ACP roles. So those are the advanced care practitioners. It's the generalist roles, they're multidisciplinary, and it's where healthcare professionals have moved away from their base profession to undertake a more generalist role. So for example, in ED or acute medicine. And advanced level practice was developed in response to the increasing demands on the NHS. But the success of this model meant that this was prioritised as the key method of workforce transformation by national policy. And what was HEE subsequently invested significantly in the ACP roles, and they were successfully embedded into the existing workforce. But what does that mean for the allied health professions? We're facing our own challenges, particularly in terms of recruitment and retention. There are a lack of clearly defined clinical career pathways at the higher levels of practice. There are limited training and development opportunities at higher levels of practice. And there's often limited understanding of advanced level practice amongst the HPs themselves, and particularly amongst the stakeholders. And whilst we've seen the increase in investment in the generalist ACP roles, we haven't seen a similar increase in investment in the allied health professions. And some have indeed chosen to leave their base profession and to take up one of the generalist ACP roles. And that just means that we're losing this immense body of knowledge and experience from our professions. But advanced practice is a level of practice, not it's not a role in itself, and many AHPs are already working at this level, but stakeholders are just not aware of this, or they think they might be working at this level, but they're not sure themselves whether they are advanced practitioners and how to evidence this. Some AHPs use the title of advanced practitioner, but haven't mapped to the multi-professional framework for advanced practice in order to confirm that they fulfill the criteria. And some of the roles have evolved organically, and so they don't have the underpinning infrastructure to ensure sustainability or scalability. And it's particularly complicated for AHPs because we've got such a diversity of professions, each with their own subspecialities. So when you're devising a set of capabilities and clinical competencies, rather than just being in one role in one specialty, we've got lots of roles in lots of different specialties. So how to unpick these issues and how to achieve clarity and consistency amongst the AHP workforce. I've been leading on advancing practice at LTHT now for a few years, and I was struggling to know really where to start and how to navigate the process. I ended up working on quite a number of discrete aspects of advanced practice, but I really wanted to identify a joined up approach and get a really clear direction of travel. And rather fortuitously, at the beginning of last year, I saw the APPN advertise a conference called Breaking Down Boundaries and Barriers, Working Together Differently. And this essentially, the programme for this conference covered every conceivable aspect of advancing practice from inception to implementation, and it offered really great networking opportunities. So I applied to the ACPRC for a bursary. I think it was around £300 in total. The conference was at Liverpool, so I didn't get to go anywhere. Quite as exciting as some of the other speakers. But it was a really great day with an amazing lineup of speakers. The ACPRC got back to me straight away, let me know that the funding had been approved. I was able to book on, and it was a really straightforward process. At the conference, there were representatives from the Centre for Advancing Practice and from the regional faculties as well. And they gave really great advice on the support that's available from both the centre and the faculties for those of us that are looking to develop our advanced AHP practitioner roles within our organisations. And we were also able to find out about the different resources that are available, so we're not all in our separate areas duplicating, working on the same thing. One of those things was the maturity matrix, and this has been published nationally, and this was so valuable in helping me to measure our organisation's readiness for advanced practice, but also my CSU's readiness for advanced practice. And it also provided a framework from wherever you map at the time. You can then use that as a framework to assist you in identifying where your priorities should be. There was lots of sort of ideas regarding strategies for engaging staff and stakeholders, and lots of sharing of resources, and got some really valuable contacts who I'm still in touch with, and we share our progress through this journey. And I just came away from the day feeling really generally better able to navigate the process and develop the infrastructure to assure quality, safety and sustainability in respect of advancing practice. So I'd already undertaken an initial scoping exercise in respect of my own role, but the aims and objectives there in the middle of the poster there are what I was really able to hone in on after the conference. And the first priority was to interrogate the current AHP workforce. It's really crucial that we don't lump together all of the 8As. Some are 7s, but mostly nationally we're looking at 8As. And, you know, we need to differentiate between if we've got clinical specialists, if we've got advanced practitioners, if we've got clinical service managers. And ESR really needs to accurately reflect those roles, because certainly in terms of advanced practice roles, there are different funding streams and funding opportunities. And so it's crucial that we're identifying these roles. And we certainly did have some already established advanced practice roles, but learned that what was important there was about role promotion amongst the stakeholders. And it was important how to evidence that we were fulfilling the criteria set out in a multi-professional framework, and quite a number of our AHPs did choose to pursue accreditation through the legacy route, the supported e-portfolio route, and they're starting to come through the other side of that process now, really. And then we identified a group of staff who were aspiring to advanced level practice, who were partially there, but not quite there, and those that were right at the very beginning. And we were able to map a route out, identify funding streams, training and education opportunities. AHP workforce buy-in was absolutely crucial in the first instance. Lots of education, lots of just giving lots of different examples of some of these very niche roles as well. There's so much variation in terms of advanced practice. It's not a one size fits all. And by raising awareness amongst the AHPs, then we've been able to engage stakeholders more. And then the next area was to look at evaluating service needs. So the areas where we don't currently have AHPs working in advanced practice roles, but we feel that the service really could benefit from that. And I learned a lot about role transformation and growth from the day. All these objectives haven't been achieved yet. They're work in progress, they're ongoing, but I've certainly been able to undertake them more effectively as a result of attending the conference. And we need to ensure that we've got robust governance arrangements in place. And at the moment, I'm at the stage of developing capability and competency frameworks. And then as we move from that, we'll look at the supervision and quality assurance strategies. And we want to ensure sustainability of these roles. It's not about developing an individual, it's about developing a role in response to a service demand and ensuring that that's sustainable with appropriate funding streams, collaboration with the MDT, and evaluating the impact. And so far, in terms of impact, this has been a grassroots approach to workforce evaluation at higher levels of practice, and certainly has been very successful to date in increasing AHP and stakeholder engagement. The AHPs now have representation within the trust. That's those AHPs working at an advanced level of practice. I sit on the trust steering group and work closely with the trust lead for advancing practice and represent the AHPs and help with the policy and strategy development for all advanced practitioners within the trust. give professional leadership. Mostly, we see that it's nursing leadership for advancing practice. We've got an amazing trust lead for advancing practice who is a nurse, extremely committed to multi-professional advanced practice. But I think it's really valuable to have an AHP in a leadership role. And finally, improved readiness. And it's not just improved readiness for advanced practice, but we've also got enhanced level practice that's gaining momentum right now. And we really need to set the scene in differentiating between these roles and responsibilities and having appropriate capability and competency frameworks to underpin those. And actually, the physiotherapy career framework is about to be published, I think, any time now. And that's going to be outlining the requirements at 6 levels of practice, from support worker, new graduate, enhanced advanced consultant, and in respect of what each of the 4 pillars. So this is sort of the framework that precedes the that career framework. The logo there, it's a bit difficult to see on the poster, but that's the shared goals of the advanced practitioners within our organisation, which is to deliver outstanding patient care, to grow and develop the workforce, celebrating excellence and promoting professional pride, and developing partnerships. And that is the journey. It's not going to be a linear process by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm absolutely sure that it'll be worth it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me start. If you mind putting it, thanks, Joe. All good. Yeah, another brilliant presentation. And just before I forget, Joe, you mentioned some really good documents and frameworks there. Please feel free to share any that you have or can reference in the chat for others maybe to refer to and use, because that's superb. That's really good. Thank you very much. Okay, so I will start sharing my screen for next up. So Liz will be next up. I'll get Liz's presentation now.
Thanks, Adam.
So yours is down here. And I can go to presentation. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Adam. Hi all, my name's Liz. I'm the lead physiotherapist in the ICU follow-up clinic at Oxford University Hospitals. And I'm very lucky to have joined the committee, gosh, at the start of the year in terms of the journal co-editor. So hopefully I might meet some people probably via email over the coming months, but yeah, definitely be in touch if I can help, or, you know, think I'll probably work quite closely with Adam in terms of the research as well, but yeah, be in touch. So I was very lucky to have benefited through one of the travel bursaries back last summer, and I'm going to kind of walk you through my journey in terms of the ICS and how I use that locally. Thanks, Adam.
1 second. There's no thing coming up on the bottom left. Oh, there is. There you go.
Oh,
my bad.
That's okay. Oh, you've just skipped ahead, but I always think it's really important just to say a massive thank you to the committee, just because obviously lots of people are applying for different pots of funding and different kind of calls for, you know, work that they're trying to support. So yeah, before I go on, a big thank you. Next slide. Perfect. So a bit of a background. Obviously kind of the shift consist of, so based in intensive care historically and moved into the ICU follow-up. So we know in terms of obviously survivorship in the UK post-intensive care is definitely increasing, but in terms of ongoing rehabilitation when people leave our hospital doors is still few and far between. And in terms of Bronwyn Connolly's survey, there's very few physios and kind of dedicated rehab programs within the UK. And I was very lucky to have my post go into our local clinic. It will be 2 years this summer. And before we carried on in terms of kind of setting up the clinic and seeing, you know, what patients were coming through our doors, we felt it was a real priority to be able to understand the patient's presentations and be able to describe that consistently. And I work with a lovely but a really old school consultant who, when I try and tell him, Pete, my patients are complex, he does believe me, but I need a bit more of a currency, I need a bit more of a granulation than that. And the other thing, obviously in the UK, where kind of the post follow-up landscape is still evolving, had a bit of a fortunate opportunity to look further afield and more internationally. Next slide. So it all sounds like a grand plan, and I don't know if you saw on the title slide, the presentation where we took the initial abstract was to the World Physio Congress, which was in Dubai, so very lucky for that. And all sounds very grand and all sounds like pipeline dreaming, but obviously there was a bit of kind of cards to line up to get out there. So was very fortunate to have been made aware of the bursary from a colleague. Adam, these kind of events are great because I don't think we had them when I was thinking about applying, but I think there's kind of just very basic learning there is, you know, share the message with colleagues. It's hard enough anyway, so try and let's help each other out. If you've heard of something or been successful, try and spread the word successfully. In terms of doing the application, in terms of kind of financial planning and awareness, that was new to me, so that was kind of good. And I think also in terms of the application, it's not a lengthy application at all from the ACPRC, but it just gets you thinking in a slightly different mindset as to understanding and being able to articulate really clearly as to why you're asking for the money, and rightly so. Next slide. So as I said, I'm very lucky to be in receipt of the bursary in terms of international travel and help to kind of get across to Dubai. Next slide. So this is the abstract that we took across, so titled Long-Term Physical Consequences of Critical Illness, using the ICF, so the International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health, to map impairments. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the ICF, but really nice in terms of kind of an international platform endorsed by the World Health Organization. So obviously not the focus of the presentation this evening, but I'll just give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour. As I said, we felt it was really important to be able to consistently and effectively describe our presentation. And what I really like with the ICF is the biopsychosocial, the holistic model through not only the body part and function, but their environment, their activities, their participation. And it really looks at the patient kind of head to toe, but then in a much broader breadth with that. So we looked at patients over a 3-month period through the ICU follow-up clinic, and then tried to code them using kind of the recognised codes through the ICF. So we had 38 patients that we looked at that had received a physio review, and 2 of those reported no problems. And out of those who had reported problems, 100% had problems at the body structure and function, so primarily with their movement, and the shoulder was a key joint, but also in terms of their environment, they struggled to access healthcare services, physio primarily, but also they needed adaptations to their natural environment. And in terms of looking in terms of their goals and what they wanted to get back to, in terms of they struggled with recreation and sport, basic moving around the house and work was the other big factor. So varying needs, varying presentations, and what we thought is the ICF is just really nice in that objective manner to describe the diversity, but also the complexity of this patient population. Okay, next slide. So, as I've said, an international conference, and definitely had the critical care sessions, which is where this abstract was presented in, but other kind of long-term respiratory conditions, kind of frailty conditions. So I think, as respiratory physios by background, obviously it was a world international conference, but slightly different I guess lens and viewpoint from a pure respiratory conference, and lots of nice kind of adaptable and transferable skills. So that networking was fabulous. After the presentation, was really lucky to speak with some physios from Chile who were absolutely amazing, really fab, and they'd used the ICF and they've published a lot actually, so that was really nice to not only share their learning but to share their and be in receipt of their publications in terms of their in and their post ICU application of the ICF. And I don't know how familiar people are, but in terms of when you Google it, there's quite lengthy codes and kind of code books. And when you dig a bit deeper, actually, you can be much smarter in terms of your working as to try and apply those. And that's really helped us out. So next slide, Adam. Perfect. So in addition to that kind of initial conversation with the Chilean physios at the time, after the conference, what we've been able to bring back is we've really honed, I guess, our data collection as to how we record and how we start to analyse the application of the ICF. And I think we've been much more consistent in doing so, which has been much more valuable, I guess, between us as a physio team in terms of our communication, but then also kind of that next step with the communication back to the wider MDT. And physio is definitely valued in our clinic, which is great, but I think it just puts us in a much stronger position. That profile of the physio profession is really strong within the clinic, because we can, as I said, it's not just me saying this patient's really complex, but we can detail that really clearly, really succinctly. I think now we've got a much more of a grasp as to the patients that are coming through our doors, and then I guess kind of this will springboard us onto considering how effective our treatments are, evaluating them, and that will be a whole separate piece of work. But I want to kind of hand in hand between the assessments, but then probably onto the treatments. Down the line, will this contribute to future business cases of how we can expand the service, more staff, perhaps not only physio staff, but I would love to see perhaps an OT colleague or maybe even a social worker colleague in clinic. And I think through that biopsychosocial nature, I think hopefully it's a really exciting opportunity. Perfect. I think that's everything. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you so much, Liz. I appreciate you very busy this evening, so thanks for your time.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's great work. Okay, so now I will stop sharing again and see who's next up. Okay, so now we're going to listen to Laura, who has recorded a presentation for us. So hopefully this sound will work when I share my screen. Sarah, if you let me know if there are any issues, that'd be great. Okay. Let's go. Okay, let's try this. Loading up just a big presentation, so hopefully it'll work.
Hi, my name is Laura Garrigle. I'm a clinical specialist physio in heart and lung transplant at Within Shore Hospital in Manchester. So the research I've been working on is looking at frailty through the lung transplant pathway, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a highlight of that.
Can everyone hear Laura? Sarah, Harriet, can you
Yeah.
feedback about whether we
Yeah, I can hear fine. Yeah.
can hear? Yeah. Okay, brilliant. That's great. It's the mouse. Let's crack on. Sorry, Laura, for interrupting there. I do beg your pardon. Please go on.
Okay. So my background, I qualified as
The sound seems to have dropped out, Adam, I think.
It's dropped out, is it now?
Yeah, I can't hear.
Right, let me my apologies. Let me try and stop sharing and reshare with sound. Sorry. Let's give that a go.
In 2015. So this is the symposium, and then sort of following the pandemic, I wanted to get a little bit more involved frailty research rehab. So I completed a research internship. Symposium was held in Leuven in Belgium. We've got two different
ones going on now.
But
Okay, one second.
people like myself who work within solid organ transplant.
Right, let's go again. Yeah. Okay. Let's go again. Apologies, everyone. Time to gather your thoughts and questions for other people's presentations that are presented so far.
Hi, my name's Laura McGarrigle. So my background, I qualified as a physio in 2004 from Manchester University Physio School. And I've been a specialist in heart and lung transplantation since 2009, and also an ACPRC member since then as well. I completed my MSc in 2015 from MMU, and then sort of following the pandemic, I wanted to get a little bit more involved in research. So I completed a research internship through the NIHR Applied Research Collaboration in Greater Manchester. Leading on from that, I was then successful in getting a place on the ARC pre-doc fellowship, which I'm doing part-time over 2 years. I'm just over halfway now. So some of the work I've been doing as part of that fellowship, I have been completing a looking at interventions to modify frailty in patients awaiting a lung transplant. I've completed a survey of all the UK lung transplant centres, the MDTs within them, looking at how we measure frailty and the prehabilitation provision that's provided across the UK. I've also obviously had a training plan, and I've completed some MRES modules, as well as lots of other training as part of that fellowship. So I had the survey results accepted to a symposium in Belgium, a solid organ transplant symposium. So I applied to the ACPRC for a bursary to support me with the travel and attendance costs for that. So a great big thank you to the ACPRC for helping me to attend. So this is the symposium that I took my work to, specifically around assessment of frailty and provision of rehab prior to lung transplant. So the Time to Move symposium was held in Leuven in Belgium. A really niche symposium, but fantastic for people like myself who work within solid organ transplant. So there were people there from all over the world, all solid organ transplants, including liver, kidney. There was a lot of renal things presented there. But the whole theme of the symposium was looking at multimodal prehab before and after transplantation, specifically around physical activity, nutrition, and psychosocial interventions. So I'll give you a little bit of project background, and I can see how my camera's going to hide some of my slides, so apologies for that. So obviously I was presenting some of these slides at the conference, which is international, so a little bit of background around the NHS and the fact there's 5 UK heart and lung transplant centres. And there's just short of about 300 patients waiting a lung transplant within the UK every year. And a little bit of background around the sort of transplant candidates we see, because they do vary internationally across the different countries, depending on the healthcare systems that are in place there. And obviously with the NHS, ours probably differs a little bit from some of the European centres, for example, and those in the USA. So lung transplant candidates are obviously in end-stage respiratory failure, so they need to have been maximised medically and be failing that medical therapy to therefore qualify for a lung transplant. So they present, as you would expect, with severe breathlessness, reduced exercise capacity, and a reduced quality of life. We know that there is actually a significant rise in the proportion of older lung transplant recipients now, so therefore we are seeing more comorbidities, and that has changed definitely over the last 10 years. We're seeing that more and more. There's therefore concerns that we've got a population that's got less physiological reserve and that we're putting them through major surgery. So we know that for elderly recipients, we need a real commitment to carefully selecting the right candidates. Age in itself isn't allowed to be a contraindication for transplant, but we have to make sure that we're really targeting those with fewer comorbidities or that have got the physiological reserve to get through that massive perioperative period. And we know that that does impact their outcomes. So frailty in general, I'm sure you're all really familiar with this. It's a bit of a buzzword, isn't it, at the moment? But frailty is dynamic. It's multifactorial, characterised by reduction in physiological reserves and this reduced capacity or ability to rebound if put through a period of stress. Now, that could be an acute illness, it could be surgery, it could be a breakdown socially. There's many different factors that are going to affect your ability to recover from an insult or a major event. It is multidimensional, and I know within physio we very much view frailty as a physical condition, but actually it affects physical, neuropsychological and the social domains, and is driven by emotional and spiritual components as well, which I find quite interesting. So frailty can be age-related, disease-related, or both. So it's generally considered to be part of the geriatrician's domain, and that it's an aging concept. But we know that patients, particularly with complex health conditions, can experience this at an early age. It's not just linked to aging. And we're definitely seeing this more with our lung transplant candidates. Frailty is common, it's been studied, it's common in end-stage lung disease, particularly those listed for lung transplantation. I quite like this little diagram, and it seems quite obvious, doesn't it? But it's quite a nice, clear indicator of what happens if you're taking a non-frail patient or a frail patient and putting those through a major sort of clinical insult, which would be lung transplantation, and to see how their clinical trajectory changes. So specifically looking at frailty within lung transplantation, we know that frailty in patients on the waiting list is linked to increased morbidity and mortality on the waiting list. They're much more likely to be removed from the waiting list, and we know that it does impact some post-operative outcomes as well. Patients who are frail have an increased chance of being readmitted to hospital after a lung transplant, and there is some reports of increased post-transplant length of stay, which is obviously a difficult metric to measure in some cases. So we know that internationally the literature around frailty and lung transplant is exploding. People are obviously trying to measure it more. We're trying to really pin down how we evaluate surgical suitability, to look at the potential risks, to be able to have open conversations with patients about the risks and the benefits of lung transplant, about finding the appropriate window of what time we list people and when do they become too unwell to keep on that waiting list. But we do know that there are potential benefits from lung transplantation, so it's picking the right candidates and optimising the patients is incredibly important. I really like this diagram specifically around frailty and the lung transplant pathway. The sort of section on the left in blue looks at all the different factors that are going to impact the frailty of a lung transplant candidate. And then sort of the different states that we see people arrive for assessment. So, and then the decisions that are made based on those assessments. So if we've got a patient who is demonstrating that they're quite fit and they're robust and they're not frail, then we need to think about the timing of transplant, considering all the other factors around lung function and the trajectory of their disease, and discuss the correct opportunity window that we've got to transplant them. We don't want to list to transplant people too early, because then they're going to be the potential to make them worse, but also the outcomes after transplant in terms of longevity it's roughly about 50% mortality at 5 years. So you don't want to transplant people too early. You might actually shorten their life in some disease states, such as COPD. If we're looking at somebody who's frail, but it's potentially reversible, that's when we start to look at rehabilitation. So we need to discuss the risks, but also how that's going to affect frailty will affect them on the waiting list and their quality of life, but also how we get them into rehab programs and optimize them. And we sometimes seeing how people do within those rehab programs gives us an idea of how they're going to thrive or not after a transplant and can help us with those decisions. Or we find people where they've got severe frailty that's potentially irreversible, maybe not linked specifically to their lung disease, but to other factors such as, severe arthritis or severe osteoporosis and nutritional problems, because we know and we can counsel the patients around their worst outcomes. And actually, is transplant the right thing for this person? Is it what they want? And are we doing the right thing in terms of optimizing our allocation of organs to the right candidates for the best outcomes? So how do we measure frailty in this population? This is from a really recent review, and I think there is no consensus currently on how we should measure frailty. All the literature uses lots of different measures, physical measures, cumulative deficit models, the good old eyeball test that we know some of the doctors like to use. But really, this eyeball test is what we've always known instinctively. And I've worked in transplant a long time now. And before we really used outcome measures to measure frailty, it was that gut feeling that you had in your stomach that that person hasn't got the reserve they need to get through the surgery and the post-op period. And now this is where we're really trying to formalize with specific measurable outcomes to give us much better data rather than just going off that gut feeling that you have. I think quite clearly, and I love this in this study and many others. So this is just a small selection of some of the outcomes that are used within lung transplantation. In the literature, there are masses, which makes it quite hard to know what we should be doing. There's no consensus within any of the consensus guidelines about exactly what we should be measuring and how that should impact our decision making. It does still come down to a clinical judgment. So what did our study aim to do? So we know there's a lack of consensus around what we should be measuring, and we don't really know what we're offering patients within the UK. So we wanted to describe how and when we're measuring frailty in patients awaiting a lung transplant, identify frailties is considered and our transplant teams using it within the UK in their listing decisions. We wanted to explore what MDT prehab interventions are prescribed to target frailty whilst patients are on the waiting list, specifically around the wider concept of frailty, not just physical frailty and not just physical measures, but we wanted to look at nutrition, psychology. So we surveyed all members of the MDT. And we wanted to just sort of briefly touch on looking at barriers for provision of prehab, and this is probably going to snowball into a bigger study in the future. So we used an anonymous cross-sectional survey where we accessed transplant teams through transplant coordinators as gatekeepers. We looked specifically at adult transplantation, not paediatric, and we had an ethics waiver from the University of Manchester. So just a real snippet of some of the results that we found. We had responses from all UK transplant centres, so we did get coverage across there. We didn't see any responses from OTs or from surgeons. Now, I know that surgeons are definitely assessing people prior to transplant. I'm not sure whether OTs are, so we're lacking some responses here. But we had a good response from a large variety of professions, mainly physios and transplant coordinators. So we asked whether frailty is discussed at listing meetings and how it influences people's feeling about those people that they're looking to list. So you can see here that it is routinely looked at in the majority of cases, or it's sometimes considered. So it's obviously being discussed and it's obviously being considered, but the measurement is slightly different concept. So we asked what tools people were using to measure physical frailty in this scenario and what surrogate frailty measures are being used. So you can see the short physical performance battery, or the SPBB, was used most commonly, and that was mostly used by physiotherapists, but wider members of the team are starting to use this tool. Other things that people were looking at were fees, which I thought was quite interesting from a speech and language therapist, and still the good old end of the bed test. Interestingly, grip strength wasn't used in a massive number of people, considering it's quite an easy clinical tool to use. There was just under 13% of people, and that was the only strength-related measure that we found was used. So we asked what prehab people are providing within the UK, and really we found that only 5 out of 7 physios don't provide any preoperative advice, support or treatment. So a lot of the role within the UK is just assessment. And our patients, when they come in for a transplant assessment, it's usually for a very short period. At our centre, we have a 3-day assessment pathway. I think it's similar through the other centres. So they have a massive amount of tests and assessments done within those 3 days. And usually a physio will see those people sort of on one occasion, do their assessment, and actually the provision within the UK of ongoing support from the transplant team is more limited. That tends to happen in patients' local hospitals. But people are referring to other services, referring closer to home for other interventions. Some of the outpatient interventions here are face-to-face, some done by telephone, and some referral, but most, referral to rehab services are closer to patients' homes. But these results were from across the whole of the MDT, not just physios. Where prehab was performed or included, and that is done by a variety of methods, but that did include exercise, nutrition and psychosocial factors as well. And then some of these sort of open-ended questions we asked around, we just asked, what are your opinions and feelings, and what else do you want to tell us about measuring frailty? So we've seen here that there's grouped them into sort of 4 areas, and there was a real recognition that frailty is dynamic, and that it's discussed, but we need to consider that it can be managed and modified, that it's multifactorial, that it isn't just a physical process, and that we need to, this one quote here about a young patient that's frail specifically due to their respiratory disease. When we transplant them, when we've given them a better respiratory capacity, actually that frailty can be modified, and we do see that day to day. That it's objective, and that people are wanting to try and make that assessment more objective. But also the effect that frailty does have on post-op outcomes was recognised by lots of people as well. Some of the barriers to provision of prehab within the UK, and this would be unsurprising to a lot of people, is the lack of staffing and funding and the lack of space within the transplant centres. So historically within the UK, sort of therapy provision around transplant has very much been in the post-op domain, and it's only recently that all the transplant centres have managed to get physios within that pre-op assessment, sort of in that assessment process. But lack of staffing and funding, because we're all pulled very much into the post-op recovery area. Also sort of perception information there around patients' perceptions, of if they're well enough, and maybe some perceptions within the MDT. So I think we need to explore this a bit further. And I've covered that last little box up, but the distance that patients are required to travel to the transplant centre is a clear barrier. If you think that we might see patients in the Manchester centre that come from the north of Scotland or the south of Wales, are they going to attend the transplant centre for their prehab? Probably not. That distance is limiting. But we know in other countries, so Canada, for example, their transplant centre in Toronto used to make it mandatory that people had to move within 2 hours of their transplant centre and attend rehab 2 or 3 times a week, or they were taken off the waiting list. And I think we're looking at the era now of developing digital interventions and remote monitoring, and in the systematic review that I've been doing, that's become quite clear that those sorts of interventions are being looked at more and more. So that's an option potentially for the So I took this work to the symposium, and like I said, the ACPRC very kindly funded my travel and my training fund through the NHR covered my accommodation. But it was an absolutely fantastic opportunity to present alongside some other really interesting research. And we found, it's a chance for me to look at my presentation skills, and actually I had to change what I was putting in there, thinking, people from European cities and Canadian. There were Canadian therapists there as well, not as familiar with the NHS, so I had to think about how I presented that slightly differently. it was really, really useful to get some feedback and people to ask questions about the projects I've been working on, the results that I found, and then maybe where that's going to go in the future. I've made, have some connections with other people from other centres who have already been in discussions with about how we could collaborate in the future. It was really useful, even though we were looking at other solid organ transplantation, looking at the research designs people had used, the barriers that they'd found, and some of the results that were coming out of those pieces of research were really interesting. It was just the chance, because it was quite a small symposium, it was very, very much patient-centred. So they had patient representatives there, and prior to each of the major sessions and people's presentations, they had a patient that would present and their experience of transplant, their experience of either prehab or rehab, and physical activity and nutrition. So it really kept the focus back on the patient and their experiences, and that was really useful to see, sitting alongside some of the current research that was being done. It was also fantastic to meet up with some of the physios from the other UK transplant centres who we've probably not seen face to face since pre-COVID. So that was really useful. It's always good to do a little bit of benchmarking informally, and then plan some future meetings, and to see what's going on in other centres in the UK and where services and staffing and clinical developments are happening. Again, just to sort of reconfirm the common challenges we have throughout the UK, to plan some future meetings, and again, think about more collaborations across the 5 UK centres. So on the back of this work, what have I got planned for the future? So I'm currently writing up a systematic review around interventions and the results and the ability of those interventions to modify frailty for patients on the waiting list. Hopefully that will be submitted soon. Just started to do some PPIE work, so I'm trying to recruit some patients from sort of our transplant centre and around the UK, and I've had some funding from our local charity that supports the transplant service in Manchester to help me do that. So that's coming up over the summer. I'm hoping to apply for one of the DCAF programmes run by the NIHR later this year, and as part of that I'd like to do some qualitative work, so really look at the experiences of patients and of carers of trying to undergo prehab and trying to optimise themselves before a transplant. I think that might help us to guide us with how we develop our future interventions and how we look to best support patients on the waiting list, because if we can't develop some interventions that are acceptable to the patients and that work with their complex needs and the amount of oxygen they have to transport around with them and the distance they have to travel, I think we're not going to be able to manage to get as compliant. So I think that's quite important. And then hopefully we'll have a look at what interventions in the future might look like and potentially pilot some of those. So thank you for asking me to speak, and thank
Okay, thanks to Laura. Okay, I will share the next presentation by Liz Shepherd, Connie Webster and Stevie Peake. Bear with me. And I will, okay. Okay, all good to present, Liz?
Thank you. I can't actually see the poster at the moment, but I don't know if that's just my screen.
No, I can't see it either, Liz.
Okay, I will stop sharing and reshare.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, no problem.
We got your file with all the presentations on it, so whatever screens that's on, what we want to see. If that helps. Yes, beautiful. Thanks, Adam.
So thank you very much for inviting Connie and I to speak this evening. So my name is Elizabeth Shepherd. I'm a physio in Southampton, and I'm an adult primary ciliary dyskinesia physio, but because that's so wordy, we normally just abbreviate that to PCD. Connie and I received funding to attend the ERS Congress last year in Milan in September. And we also were able to attend a research event for PCD, which is always held a couple of days before the ERS. Just to give you a bit of background about the PCD service in England, PCD is a rare lung disease and affects about 1 in 7,500 people. In 2020, NHS England established funding for 4 adult PCD services in the country. There had been paediatric services since 2012, but once these adults reached the age of 18, they were then generally looked after either by their GPs or by general bronchiectasis services, or sometimes by cystic fibrosis services. And this was an attempt by NHS England to standardise the care and also improve the level of care that these adult patients were getting. So there's 4 specialist services in England, 1 in Southampton, there's 1 in Leeds where Connie works, 1 at the Brompton where our colleague Stevie Peake works, and then there's a shared care service between Leicester and Birmingham. As I said before, before the ERS conference, there is always something called the Beat PCD Research Day, and that is a day where people from Europe and also further abroad who work in PCD go and share the latest research that is going on in PCD. And actually, it's the only PCD specific research conference that is held each year. So it was brilliant to be able to attend that. It was the first time that I had attended it, and also Connie as well. And it was a fantastic opportunity to meet people who work in PCD from right across Europe and further afield. Really interesting to hear the differences in how physiotherapists and other teams work with patients with PCD, particularly adults with PCD. And it was brilliant to be able to listen to the latest research that has been going on. PCD is an area that in the past there's been very little research, and the research that has been done in PCD has often linked into bronchiectasis and cystic fibrosis. And what we're trying to do now is to have research that is PCD focused and PCD specific. One of the reasons that we were attending the event was because we had a poster that had been accepted. We have been writing some adult physiotherapy standards of care, and we had a poster accepted at the ERS to present the initial results from the literature search that we had done as part of the standards of care. And it was fantastic that the ACPRC gave both Connie and I the money to go towards our conference fees, which are really quite expensive for something like the ERS, the travel and the accommodation. So I'm now going to hand over to Connie, and she's just going to tell you a bit about what we actually learned from the conference and where we're going from here.
Thanks, Liz. Hi everyone, I'm Connie. I'm the physio for adults with PCD in the north of England, and I'm based at Leeds Teaching Hospitals. So as Liz said, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how being able to attend the ERS and the Beat PCD has kind of furthered our networking and research opportunities since we attended in September last year. Firstly, at ERS, there's so many opportunities to learn and expand your knowledge, and you can't possibly attend everything, but some of the areas that we watched talks on that kind of got us thinking were around pulmonary rehab, obesity and the impact on the lungs, and the treatment of chronic rhinosinusitis. And we were also able to attend the physio-specific sessions to hear about projects in all different specialities within respiratory physio, which was really inspiring as well. But particularly at the Beat PCD Day, which, as Liz said, is one of the only PCD specific research events in the world, we were able to hear about brand new research within our speciality, learn about new developments in diagnostic testing, and listen to patient experiences as well. So we had some really excellent talks on the CLEAN PCD study, which looked at nebulized therapy, the results from the COVID PCD, which was a fertility study, and ProValve PCD looking at lung function variability, all of which are extremely relevant to our day-to-day practice and our patients that we see in clinic. And so this got us thinking about our own research plans and starting to gather data on a national level. So some of the projects that we have planned at the moment, which we hope to complete over the course of the year, are looking at the incidence of urinary stress incontinence in adults with PCD, the impact of pulmonary rehab in adults with PCD, the incidence of smoking and vaping in PCD, and looking kind of to making an overview of the types of airway clearance techniques that are used by adults with PCD in general, really. And we hope that by collecting this data on a national level, it'll give us a much clearer picture of the disease process and the outcomes of adults with PCD in all areas of England, which is the whole idea of the National Service with regards to providing equitable care across the country to all people with PCD. But kind of just going back to attending the conferences, not only did these events mean that we could expand our knowledge, but we're also able to make some really invaluable connections with other international PCD colleagues. So we were able to make some links with a respiratory therapist in America who's now joined our group called International PCD Physiotherapy Network, or IPCDPN. And please, anyone get in touch if you are interested in joining IPCDPN. We put on 6 monthly webinars, and our most recent one a few weeks ago, we were able to collaborate with our new international colleagues, and we had Mike present a research update on PCD in the USA. Felix presented the CLEAN PCD data that we'd heard in Milan, and he's based in Germany. We also had Lynn Schofield, who's the paediatric PCD physio in Leeds, who presented some of her PhD findings. And we had another well-known speaker from Australia as well. And through the webinar, we've now had access to further international PCD physio groups, knowledge of other PCD specific research events, and we've had invitations from respected international colleagues as well to collaborate, which is great. So just to finish off, really, we're just really grateful to the ACPRC for supporting our work and the development of the National PCD Service, which we hope will continue to go from strength to strength. And that's it from us, really. But I just want to reiterate kind of what everyone else has said in terms of the ease of the application process and the speed at which the committee kind of get back to you with an answer, because it really does make life so much easier and makes the process, well, it certainly for me made the process much less stressful overall, knowing that that funding was there. So thank you very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I'm very aware of the time and the presentations have been fantastic, but I think that there won't be any time for question and answers after Simon's presentation. And so what I recommend people do is they can either tweet their questions to @the ACPRC, or you can email questions to me via research@acprc.org.uk, and I can forward them to the speakers themselves. Simon, how are you doing? You all right?
Evening, everyone.
Good to see you. And you know, last but very much not least, I've got a slide up, and I'm not sure whether it's the most recent one, so I can show it. And then if you have a more recent one, then you may be able to share, but if not, don't worry, that's absolutely fine. So I'll share my screen now, and then I'll close after your presentation. Bear with me. So we'll go to that. Are those the points that you wanted to discuss, Simon?
Yeah.
Right.
There is more to the slide. There is more to it. So if you just obviously do this slideshow, then
Yeah,
I'll get you
yeah.
to scroll through it. Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name's Simon Hayward, and I'm formerly a critical care physio based in Blackpool, although I'm not clinical anymore now, shall I say. So my background, for those that don't know, is primarily lung ultrasound, and I've been banging that drum probably for a decade now, pretty much. So I wanted just to touch on a few things that the ACPRC and their very kind awards and grants have supported me to do some fantastic traveling and some fantastic collaborations that are in the past and are very much, like a lot of other people have alluded to, ongoing. So I was very fortunate to be awarded the Sarah Keelty Leadership Award a couple of years ago. And that allowed me to go to and start to network with some colleagues in the States. And then I applied for an educational grant to kind of do some follow-up work with those individuals, again, over in the United States. So I think the main point from me regarding lung ultrasound specifically is that we're very lucky in this country. We have quite a high degree of autonomy. We, through things like non-medical prescribing, and that was lobbying to the government to change those rules, but our fundamental baseline is quite a high level of autonomy. We don't need referrals. We can self-refer. We don't need a prescription from another medical professional, usually a doctor. So when it comes to something like ultrasound and diagnostics, there's been a little bit of confusion about whether we are allowed to do it, but very much in the recent few years, that's become a lot clearer with the CSP documents and things like that. So we have an ability to use diagnostic ultrasound within our diagnostic process, our pathology identification, and incorporating that into our clinical reasoning. So basically, we can do a lot more than some of our colleagues around the world. So I had individuals reach out to me from the States, particularly obviously around what we would call lung and they call pulmonary ultrasound, and they wanted to do some work and collaborate with me to try and help showcase their work and raise the profile of lung ultrasound and just ultrasound generally within the United States. So if you are happy to move the slide on for me, Adam, that'd be great. So the Sarah Keelty Leadership Award allowed me to work with some individuals and travel to San Diego in California. Fantastic opportunity. And again, Adam, there's a couple bullet points. You can bring both of them up actually, and again. So the presentation was, gone too far, mate. The presentation was based around lung ultrasound, was my point, was my part of the presentation, and another individual, Rich Severin, who is quite well known in the States for his work around the vital to vital and kind of doing assessments with patients every chance you get. And another individual who does cardiac ultrasound as a physical therapist and doing cardiac ultrasound in the ICU. And we did a presentation basically showcasing what ultrasound can do for PTs, primarily in the critical care, but kind of more in the acute care setting. And while I was over there, I collaborated with a company called GUSI. So that stands for Global Ultrasound Institute. And they have a really good ethical model to their work. So they do kind of charge, so we say, high income countries, but then they actually use those funds to support the advancement of ultrasound training within low and middle income countries as well. So collaborated with them, did some show and tell in the industry sections, and got a chance to support that company and generally kind of start to network. San Diego it was beginning to build up a little bit. No, that's fine, Adam. San Diego was beginning to build a little bit, but it really, and this was the importance of the educational grant for me, was to basically take it a step further. So this year in February, so only last month, I got a chance to go to Boston this time. Very cold in Boston. I wouldn't recommend Boston in February, to be honest. But obviously, the APTA are choosing conference venues that are a bit cheaper in the February months because it's a bit colder. So yeah, very, very cold in Boston. But again, I'm not going to complain about that at all. Beautiful city. So taking it a step further. So again, Adam, if you can push through a few of the bullet points should come up. So took it a step further, and one more. Took it a step further, and we ran a workshop. So this is a chance for the PTs that had attended the previous year to perhaps get a bit of a hands-on experience and get a chance to do some scanning themselves. It wasn't not trying to teach a course or anything. I also had the opportunity to present a poster while I was there, which was, and it's hopefully still working on the manuscript, but hopefully going to be published later this year. But an update on the scoping review I did back in 2016, which was published in 2018. And that took 26 PT-related publications back then. And we're now around the 150 mark for lung ultrasound and diaphragm ultrasound, specifically within the physical therapy and physiotherapy profession. So again, presenting that work, which was fantastic. Again, much more of a buzz this year with regards to ultrasound, particularly ultrasound within the acute care. Like the UK, there's very much a focus on MSK over in the States. And that makes sense with PT as well. But trying to push it into their kind of what they call their CVP, their cardiovascular pulmonary sections as well. Then we had a Technopalooza. I don't blame you for not knowing what a Technopalooza is. It's a word I've never ever heard of before, but basically it's like a show and tell is the best way I can describe it. So it was an evening event. You had the APTA council there, lots of different, so it was invitation, so it wasn't just an industry thing. Lots of kind of people networking, milling around and seeing what the technology is about, kind of advancement of practice and things like that. So it was quite a nice, relaxed forum to kind of show these things off. So we got a chance to do not just the MSK with our MSK colleagues, but got to do the cardiovascular pulmonary stuff as well. And kind of one thread that's gone throughout this the whole time, had I not been in San Diego, had I not reinforced those relationships in Boston, was the invitation to be kind of their pulmonary expert on a white paper. So obviously in the UK, we kind of refer to a white paper as a government document, but for them, it's more kind of similar to what the CSP has done with the context documents. So it's more of a governance style document that they want to introduce over there, hopefully to cover all 50 odd of the states, because each state has a different setup. But the idea was that they've got musculoskeletal, pelvic floor, cardiac, diaphragm, and then I was going to be the lung expert. So I've been really lucky to kind of work with people in the states that are on the national level for kind of diagnostic ultrasound within PT. So some, as you can imagine, some fantastic contacts. So going forwards, that kind of white paper work is continuing. A little bit like herding cats sometimes. Lots of people have different opinions of what should be going on. There's discussions about running an ICU ultrasound specific session in Houston next year. So hopefully that will have an opportunity to come through. And then again, like I'm sure many people have had discussions in a coffee shop or a pub or a bar about kind of where you take these things forwards. It's why we do it, I'm sure. Have a chance to collaborate and network. So taking this perhaps through to a publication about ICU specific ultrasound, head to toe, whatever is relevant to physiotherapy and or physical therapy, with a view to perhaps just starting to show what could be done in the future. And I'm certainly in discussions with individuals around the UK as well with this sort of work. And then GUSI collaborations, taking it further. So I really want to, like I mentioned before about the autonomy within the UK, I'm now looking into Europe and now looking to the rest of the world to kind of help these other countries to build up their governance structure to allow them to be able to access this technology. Some places, you know, even high-income countries, like have no ability to touch this because it's not within their PT practice at all, and usually legislated so that they can't even use it. So a lot of the time it's just a void, people don't know, so it's a case of kind of building up this. So with Goosey, I'd love to build up some of the countries around the world, get their governance structures in place, and then begin to use Goosey and other companies as well to kind of start to educate some of the individuals that can kind of go on to take it further and roll that out across the country. And then finally, again with Goosey, hopefully, and some other individuals from around the world, perhaps getting a chance. One more forwards, please, Adam. Get the chance to kind of showcase some of the work around what we're doing, generally with lung and diaphragm ultrasound, but perhaps a few other bits and pieces, a WCPT in 2025 as well. So there's a plan trying to bring together a speaking team already to kind of present some of the ultrasound work and the potential out in Tokyo 2025. So I'd certainly, again, like others have, I'd like to thank the ACPRC for giving me the chance to go to California, to go to San Diego, giving me the chance to go to Boston, because without that regular contact and face-to-face meetings and networking, you know, at every opportunity, that I wouldn't have had a chance to kind of build this work that I've done. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Simon, and thanks to all the speakers today for giving their time this evening, and for everyone for attending today's session. I think there's a clear theme that you know, going to conferences or submitting some work to conference offers some great opportunities to get networking and really progress your career and personally a lot further than you may imagine. And so with that in mind, there is the ACPRC conference, of course, coming up in April in Edinburgh. And so it'll be a good opportunity to think now about what sort of things that you may want to submit to conference from all the pillars of physiotherapy, so not just research-based, the other three pillars as well. So just a note to say thank you again, and if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to contact the ACPRC either via Twitter or you can email me. And this session will be recorded, so please feel free to advertise that once it's up on the website. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.